Today we're examining Drifblim at the patron's request. Many know it from the Diamond and Pearl games, where gym leader Fantina led off with it, while it was also featured on Elite Four Flint's team. It was quite popular in the Sinnoh region in general, even as it was absent from both of those trainers' teams in Platinum, especially thanks to the prominence of its pre-evolution Drifloon, which was used by many an in-game trainer, yet could only be found before the Valley Windworks on a Friday. Drifblim is of course based on a hot air balloon, hence the allusion to the blimp in its name, which inspired many a trainer to give it the very original nickname of Hindenburg. The fact that it can learn explosion spurred that along nicely. Speaking of its name, it's also anecdotally a commonly misspelled name. The temptation to add the T is quite great, but no, it is not spelled like Drifblim, though admittingly an embarrassing typo or two found its way into the writing of this script. Ditto the P at the end. Interestingly, during that process of writing about definitely not Drifblim, we also learned that Drifblim's design draws inspiration from certain Kaidan, or Japanese ghost stories, specifically those where ghosts and spirits are compared to balloons. Today we're going to explore the scariest Kaidan of all, the competitive Pokemon scene. Was Drifblim a victim caught up in the swirl of such fear, or was it one of the spirits that made it so scary? We're going to find out as we ask, how good was Drifblim actually? But before we start, ditch those boring browsers that eat up your RAM while using them anyway. Like seriously, how are you supposed to play games when Chrome is eating up so much RAM? And get this video sponsor, Opera GX. Opera GX has an awesome feature known as the GX control, and thanks to it, I can just limit how much RAM Opera eats up so I can have my computer focus on gaming. Seriously, look at how much Opera eats with GX control compared to Chrome. It's night and day. Not only that, but Opera's aesthetic is customizable thanks to the mods. Last time we talked about how there's so many mods to choose from, including this awesome Pokemon Emerald mod that I love. But now Opera GX has a collaboration with the new Venom movie, Venom: The Last Dance. Let the symbiote take over your GX with this awesome Deadly Host mod. Equipped with all the sound effects and more. But that's not all. Opera has cool features like the GX corner, which tells me everything that's going on in gaming. Ayo, a new Mario Party? I can't wait to play this with my friends. Finally, changing browsers has never been easier. Literally just use this import browser tool and boom. Opera GX is now your default browser with everything you originally had on the old browser without any of the hassle. So what are you waiting for? Ditch your boring browser and get a top-notch one, and use my link in the description below and download Opera GX for free today. And also be sure to see Venom: The Last Dance in theaters October 24th. And thank you so much to Opera GX for sponsoring this video. And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Drifblim was the Pokemon that introduced the Unburden ability to the world. Its held item would be consumed, and its speed would be doubled. The possibilities here were spectacular, as it was effectively 2 boosts simultaneously. The strategy was made famous by Halucha later on, but players recognized its potential early on and attempted to make it work. Drifblim was not at all geared towards OU, with its enormous HP betrayed by paltry defenses without being particularly strong even after a Calm Mind. It was experimented with some in UU, and the results were decent, but it still didn't quite pack enough of a punch. Still, the potential was there. The substitute Calm Mind strategy was tried and true, especially on a ghost type immune to seismic toss from walls, as demonstrated by Miss Magius. But while Missy was the more consistent choice and thus the UU staple, especially once it received Nasty Plot in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Drifblim was unique in how it, once consuming the berry it would substitute down to, whether it was gaining health back with Citrus once it dropped to 50%, making it tougher to revenge kill, or going all in on damage by boosting its special attack further with Pataya Berry. Riskier since it had to go down to 25% for that, but it would also gain the doubled speed. And so you'd have a Calm Mind sweeper that was also outrunning Choice Scarfers. The issue was that Drifblim just wasn't that strong, or that bulky even with the boost, and Unburden was a one-time deal, so it had to be precise with knowing when to commit, and to find opportunities to do so. It really had to get crafty and make the most of its unique typing, but the potential was certainly there in letting it bowl over frailer offense teams, especially with how it punished common choice attacks like the stabs from NU's Tauros and Medicham. Yes, that's where Drifblim wound up, and that's where it excelled. It took some time, but it eventually rose to become among the metagame's most feared threats. Sure, meta staple Pursuit Skuntank was around every corner, but that was manageable to lure out and leave indisposed through teammates like Slowking and Gardevoir. Once Skuntank was out of the picture, Drifblim could take over a match like little else. Plus, Drifblim could run Hidden Power Ground instead of its usual fighting to help in the effort itself, though this left it more vulnerable to Cacturne, Sharpedo, and Linoon. Regardless of how Skuntank was dealt with, doing so was well worth it, as Drifblim rose to become one of the most potent sweepers in the tier. It found plenty of setup opportunities with its typing, and in a late-game scenario against weakened teams, its combination of boosting both power and speed made it utterly lights out, cutting through these teams easily. But that wasn't even all. Drifblim wasn't beholden to activating Unburden through subbing down to a berry. It could also jumpstart its health by resting back up to full once it had accumulated sufficient Calm Minds, immediately waking up with Cheselberry and kicking off the Unburden antics. Alternatively, it didn't even need to use a berry or Calm Mind at all to activate Unburden. It was quite a decent lead. It dished out decent damage with Shadow Ball and HP fighting, while also threatening Sleep with Hypnosis. It was especially good at using Sleep since Hypno and its Insomnia ability didn't want to block the status for fear of Shadow Ball. So while attacking and sleeping, Drifblim would survive any one hit with Focus Sash, not having to fear it being broken by Fake Out thanks to its Ghost typing, so it drops to 1 HP with the Sash, which would then activate Unburden, and that doubled speed allowed it to fire off its powerful explosion before going down. Sleep one thing, blow up on something else. That pseudo 2-for-1 has been an excellent way to start the game since RBY, and Hypnosis accuracy willing, Drifblim was quite good at it. Furthermore, between bulk investment and Will-O-Wisp, Drifblim was quite tanky and found itself using that alongside its Ghost typing to fill a role as one of the tier's best spin blockers, dishing out further passive damage alongside spikes. Finally, Drifblim could even clean up late game with the greater immediacy of Choice Scarf without needing to activate Unburden. In fact, it didn't even use Unburden on this set. Instead, it used its other excellent ability, Aftermath, getting superb 25% chip on anything that might feint it with a physical move. If it wasn't feigning that way, it was probably taking something else down with it through its speedy explosion. Overall, it took some time, but Drifblim eventually established itself as a top tier Pokemon in its debut generation of NU. It wound up even overtaking Haunter as the metagame's most dangerous ghost. Generation 5 brought about a new method of Unburden enabling, the Gems. Now the intricacy of Drifblim's strategy was taken to the next level, as it could unleash a powerful Flying Gem boosted Acrobatics and activate its Unburden in one fell swoop. And the beauty of Acrobatics was of course that it, too, was stronger when no item was held. Beyond that, it harassed opponents with Will-O-Wisp, Destiny Bond, and potentially even Disable. It was very difficult for much of anything in NU to switch into this set without being severely affected in some way at the very least. Acroblimp, as it was called, was quite potent, but you didn't have to use it if you didn't want to. You could also run good old sub Calm Mind Drifblim to solid effect, a set which was now even scarier because it could activate Unburden and power itself up simultaneously with Ghost Gem. That initial power boost was major for Drifblim, which could sometimes struggle to get the ball rolling between its rather unspectacular special attack stat and Shadow Ball's good but not explosive power. But with the help of that initial gem assisted burst to break through something tankier standing in your way, you would roll the rest down that hill much more easily. Drifblim was a solid NU Pokemon, but it was a rarer one because Unburden's one-time nature meant it had to be played much more carefully, and the power creep of this generation meant it was much more difficult to find opportunities and get value than the previous one, meaning putting Drifblim on a team was more specific and rare, especially because there was very strong, more consistent Ghost-type competition. Sure, they didn't always possess Drifblim's Unburdened heights, but they also did not have to be as precious about their switch-ins and moves. Golurk and Misdreavus both pack superb defensive utility, especially with Stealth Rock and Golurk, while also posing a threat offensively. And though Haunter wasn't nearly as good defensively, its much stronger initial onslaught was generally more effective against this faster-paced NU tier than Drifblim's more spectacular brand of offense. Drifblim's Stealth Rock weakness was an especially glaring obstacle in this regard. Thus, Drifblim was certainly a fine Pokemon, but it took more effort to make work than its competition, marking a decent to solid sophomore generation. Also worth noting is that Gen 5 is where Drifblim gained the Flare Boost ability, which was close to a special form of Guts. While burned, its special attacks received a 50% boost. Not something that Drifblim would be particularly happy to use, at least not in any gen where burn did 12.5% damage per turn, as opposed to the much more manageable 6.25%, but it was a very cool ability that to this day only Drifblim and its pre-evolution Drifloon have. Switching a Specs Flare Boost Pokemon into a Scald and turning the burn into a source of added power sounds amazing, but spoiler alert, that doesn't wind up happening for Drifblim. And it's a shame too, because Gen 6 took a step forward for Shadow Ball spam by removing Steel's resist to Ghost. However, Drifblim was to stick with its tried and true Unburden ability and did so in the newly added lowest tier PU. But first, it had some use in NU. The gems had been removed, which was a blow, but Drifblim found a new way to make acrobatics work on a mixed set. With Substitute and Will-O-Wisp, it spread status easily, much like many other excellent Ghost types, while subbing down to Citrus Berry rejuvenated its health, activated Unburden, and powered up acrobatics. The lowered immediacy of acrobatics' threat was certainly a shame, but nothing unmanageably terrible. Plus, Drifblim greatly enjoyed taking advantage of its newly buffed Ghost Stab on this set by not using Shadow Ball but Hex, another move with double power under certain conditions. Its condition, of course, being a statused opponent, which Drifblim's Will-O-Wisp took care of nicely. Of course, it fit well on teams that enjoyed status spam as a whole, so it could threaten more immediately. The mixed approach of Drifblim's stabs made it quite difficult to wall, as physical tanks shrugging off acrobatics disliked the status field Hex, and the opposite was also true of special walls, more geared towards eating Hexes disliking acrobatics. Eventually though, Drifblim's viability in NU expired. It just didn't hit hard enough, and it wasn't exactly bulky or fast enough to get as many opportunities as it liked either. Thus it headed to PU, and there it shifted its game a little. It mostly enjoyed an all-out physical set, bolstered by the activation of Unburden through summing down to Lychee Berry, which gave acrobatics a much appreciated kick. Before committing to that though, it spread plenty of discord through opponents' ranks through not just Will-O-Wisp, but a buffed knockoff, ensuring a lingering spread of passive damage. It was certainly an effective set, but it was also severely limited in its coverage, which was particularly problematic given that even a Lychee boosted acrobatics wasn't shattering much of the metagame, and indeed to that end, it was quite specific in having to sub all the way down to 25% for Lychee Berry to activate Unburden and acrobatics, which limited it greatly. It could also run a classic Calm Mind Chesto Rest set, which was fine, but the greater emphasis on prolonged setup didn't fit too well in the more bang-bang style of the metagame, centering around the immediate assaults of Stoutland and Rotom Frost. Drifblim was a fine Pokemon, but quite a specific one. Gen 7's PU power creep rendered the tier unrecognizable relative to its previous iteration. If Drifblim had been decent there, it stood nary a chance in this new metagame that bowled it over at every corner and outclassed it for good measure. Why would you use Drifblim when you could use a stronger, more immediately better Ghost Flying type in Oricorio Sensu? The answer? You wouldn't. Any potential built-up Unburden payoff couldn't compare to Oricorio Sensu dropping hurricanes all over the place, to say nothing of its superior Ghost Stab in Revelation Dance, or its resilience in Roost, or the fact that it could cut through so many Pokemon so easily and so immediately because it was much faster and stronger off the cuff. Yeah, technically Drifblim had a niche because it could outspeed Scarfers thanks to Unburden, of course. It still wasn't anywhere near worth playing 5v6 with a purely inferior Pokemon in most games though. For each game Drifblim won you, Oricorio Sensu would win you at least 10, probably more. It's hard to put an exact number to this kind of thing, not just because it's a difficult metric to measure, but also because Drifblim was never ever used in serious PU at all, and fell out of tier into the limbo of untiered. VGC gave Drifblim an opportunity to prove that it was more than just a bag of hot air. While it spent most of its existence floating far away from anything resembling competitive viability, Sun and Moon provided a favorable climate that saw Drifblim ascending, just for a moment, to the heights of top-level competition. Drifblim may have had access to Unburden from the very beginning, but it struggled to easily proc the ability up until the advent of different terrains, and more importantly, the seeds associated with those terrains. Proc Drifblim seed, and it would instantly start moving at speeds usually associated more with a fighter jet than a hot air balloon. With Drifblim now the fastest thing on the field, it's easy to forget that those seeds have a purpose other than accelerating it to Mach speed. They provide a one-time boost to your defense depending on which seed the Pokemon was holding. This happened to align perfectly with Drifblim's stat profile. You can see that usually its bulk could be classified as just okay. 150 base HP is great, but those defensive stats even it out. Add a seed to the mix though, and Drifblim became a real problem to get rid of, shrugging off even super effective attacks with ease if they targeted the boosted defensive stat. Most players chose Misty or Psychic Seed, as special defense was often more relevant when facing down the glut of Tapu Kokos in the format. Drifblim's job was to take those favorable thermals and spread them to the rest of the team, in the form of Tailwind. After consuming its seed, Drifblim could almost invariably get off a fast Tailwind. It also made it a viable wall to Snorlax, a dominant force in the limited 2017 metagame. While there were some shenanigans available with with Misty terrain, such as swaggering your own teammates for a free Swords Dance with no confused attach, nearly all successful Drifblim teams paired it with Tapu Lele. Tapu Lele itself was a fearsome attacker who greatly appreciated the ability to spam psychic attacks before its opponent had a chance to move. Tailwind and psychic terrain go together like chocolate and peanut butter. Tailwind lets you get those attacks off before your opponent can react, while psychic terrain stops opponents from using priority to get around your speed control. Players immediately caught on to how strong Tapu Lele was with a speed boost, but in early days many opted for Mandibuzz as their Tailwind setter of choice. Drifblim, however, could replicate the bulk of Mandibuzz while also bringing more utility. The key advantage, however, came in the typing, and I'm not talking about flying. Ironically enough, both Drifblim and Mandibuzz didn't benefit from psychic terrain as a flying type, and therefore could still be stopped by prankster taunt users like Whimsicott and Sableye. However, Drifblim's ghost typing meant it was immune to the fake outs that could still hit Mandibuzz, making it an incredibly consistent Tailwind setter, even more than some Pokemon like Talonflame. The player who found this synergy was none other than the 2015 world champion Shoma Shade Vieira Honami, who used it to win the Geico ONOG Invitational against a host of other strong players like Wolf Glick and Aaron Zhang. Look at him run through A-Drive in this top 4 match. Shade Vieira had one strategy. Just listen to Wolf Glick and Marcus Statter to know how strong it was. Being a flying type wasn't all bad news. By far the most common team composition combined Drifblim and Lele with Garchomp and Arcanine. While Arcanine was the best intimidator in the format, Garchomp was a powerful attacker who could unleash earthquakes without fear when standing next to its floating friend. No amount of seeds or abilities could really make Drifblim a viable offensive threat. However, luckily, that's not what it cared about doing. Drifblim often ran only a single attacking move in the form of Shadow Ball or Acrobatics. Tailwind was non-negotiable, and the rest of the move slots could be filled with any of your picks of Drifblim's incredible supporting move pool. We can see the variety available through the different Drifblims to make top 8 over the season, which to be honest, was quite a few of them. Kamran Jahadi, who placed 3rd at the Anaheim Regionals, opted for Acrobatics, Disable, and Swagger to boost his own Garchomp or Arcanine when Tapu Fini was out. At Collinsville Regionals, 2nd placer Justin Burns ran the very common Will-O-Wisp to handle physical attackers, especially potent when you consider Drifblim's special defense boost from its seed. At the same tournament, 7th placer Jean-Marc Hebert chose to run Sunny Day, a method of dealing with popular Golduck Politoed Rain teams in the format at the time, while 8th placer Alberto Lara also chose Wisp, Disable, Tailwind, and Shadow Ball. As you can see, Drifblim really made a name for itself this year, so we'll only touch on the most interesting sets or placements. Alberto was one of Drifblim's standard bearers throughout 2017. He achieved 3 different top 8s, using it on a team that also featured Celesteela. In Portland, he pushed the synergy between those two Pokemon to its max, kitting out his Drifblim with Stockpile and Baton Pass, making Celesteela nigh unkillable after passing boosts. This was a really nice workaround for one of Drifblim's biggest problems. Its boosts were all one-time only, meaning you were incentivized to have it sit on the field, where it wasn't always the biggest threat. Alberto may have gone back to a more standard Sunny Day set for his 4th place run at Seattle later in the season, but I'm sure opponents remember the nightmare of Stockpile Celesteela. Alberto wasn't the only trainer in Portland to innovate a new Drifblim set. The winner of the tournament, Aaron Cybertron Zhang, gave his Drifblim Destiny Bond of all things. While Aaron said that he thought Destiny Bond was an underrated move in its own right, it owed its spot on the team sheet to a synergy with Drifblim. Specifically, by using Destiny Bond the turn before Tailwind ran out, Aaron could disincentivize his opponent from targeting that slot, thereby guaranteeing he could get a second Tailwind up. Another nice solution to what does Drifblim do after clicking Tailwind. Several other players took Drifblim to tournament wins. For special events, Fabi Vergara, Santiago, Leonardo Bononomi in Lyon, Luca Lucignoli in Treviso, Kelvin Kishpe, Jiaquil, Ing Young Jing in Kuala Lumpur, and David Kodesh at the Austrian Open. Drifblim also took home a trio of international regionals, credit of Justin Luck in Kuala Lumpur, Rachel Anand in Birmingham, and Liam Gilbert in Sydney. By far its biggest achievement though was at the Oceania Internationals, where Zhou Lu won the whole thing on her home turf. The vast majority of these tournament winners used Drifblim with Lele, Chomp, and Arcanine, though the last 2 slots were variable. Some opted for Snorlax as a check to Trick Room, while others indexed into more mons who appreciated some extra speed, like Buzzwole, Kartana, and Metagross. Only 4 of the tournament winners broke from the core 4. The trio of Jiang, Rachel Anand, and David Kodesh all dropped Chomp for Nihil Eagle and Buzzwole. Both greatly appreciated the speed boost to start stacking their own beast boost, and Nihil Eagle was a clever way to integrate a mon that could both function in Tailwind and set up or reverse Trick Room. The most unique team though belonged to the other Malaysian champion, Justin Locke. While he still ran Arcanine and Garchomp, he became the only player in 2017 to win a tournament using Drifblim, but no Tapu Lele. Instead, he brought Misty Seed and Tapu Fini alongside Porygon 2 and Snorlax, bifurcating his team into the Tailwind and Trick Room modes. Regardless, Drifblim Lele was still the dominant mode. It wasn't the most common team, partially because Trick Room was so powerful, and partially because Coco and Fini were often more attractive Tapus, and to be honest, it fell completely off by Worlds. All that said, it was a team you had to be prepped for. Zolu's run to the top of OCIC is proof of that, and the sheer amount of placements and tournament wins are a testament to just how powerful Drifblim could be. Drifblim owed a lot of its 2017 success to the limited amount of Pokemon available with access to Tailwind. Its primary competition had been Pelipper, Talonflame, Whimsicott, Mandibuzz, and Murkrow. 2018, however, introduced competition like Zapdos and Mega Salamence, not to mention a whole host of physical attackers who Drifblim did not appreciate seeing, like Landorstarian and of course Incineroar. That said, Drifblim also had a new partner in crime, Mega Metagross. It's a match made in heaven, a mid-speed behemoth who can take advantage of Lele's psychic terrain to fire off Zen headbutts so strong that they can give your opponent a migraine through the screen. Benjamin O'Neill kicked off the format by taking this combo to a win at Perth Regionals, showing Drifblim still had some juice. However, it took a definite dip in viability, only making a handful of top 8s throughout the rest of the season. And then came North American Internationals. Remember how we had said that you still had to be prepared for Drifblim, even if it wasn't looking like a top threat? Just like at OCIC the year prior, Drifblim comes out of nowhere to win a whole international event when you least expected it to pop up. This time in the hands of Jeremy Rodriguez. Honestly, from Jeremy's team report, maybe even he didn't expect it to pop up. Jeremy developed this team with Ashton Cox and Shupa Cross, and both him and Ashton had placed top 8 at Roar North Regionals earlier in the season, proving the team had some solid foundation. Drifblim, as had been the case prior, was originally a Mandibuzz, a Pokemon who could set up Tailwind and damage Mega Metagross. Drifblim could do that, but it also offered a good matchup into other Megas. Will-O-Wisp handled Mega Kangaskhan and Tyranitar, but the real coup of the set was the last slot, Rain Dance. Jeremy and Ashton were actually big advocates of not always leading Drifblim Lele. With the prevalence of Incineroar and hard Trick Room, it was difficult to commit to, but there was one matchup where Drifblim was extraordinarily powerful, Charizard. Drifblim actually had an incredible matchup into Charizard Y. Not only could it remove the sun that made Zard so powerful, it could also nullify the speed that made Zard so hard to deal with, threatening it with Lele attacks that could even potentially one-hit KO it. Post NAIC, Drifblim once again fell off the map completely. Jeremy and Ashton cooked up some other teams for Worlds, where Juan Nar at 42nd was the only Drifblim player in sight. But another year, another international win. Not too shabby for that stupid balloon. Maybe it could keep the streak going in 2019? Nah, just kidding. There is no way Drifblim could hang in the restricted meta. Look, if you decide your team really needs Tailwind support, are you actually going to pick Drifblim over Yveltal or Tornadus? Other Tailwind users also rose to the forefront due to their good matchups into mons like Xerneas, Crobat being the most notable. A few brave souls tried to make Drifblim work, but they didn't crack the top 8s, and the international streak ended, as did most of Drifblim's presence in competitive VGC. Generation 8 gave Drifblim Strength Sap, a great move that plays offense and defense simultaneously with its lowering attack and restoring HP based off that attack stat. This, in conjunction with the Stealth Rock ignoring heavy duty boots, gave Drifblim new promise in terms of resilience, and indeed, in very early UU, some players used this new Drifblim to function as a defogger. But this did not last at all. Once it was realized that Drifblim's speed, defenses, and weaknesses were all very easy to take advantage of without going out of your way at all, it wasn't just a defensive defog set either. Any offensive unburdened attempts would fall flat too, despite Pursuit being removed from the game. Drifblim's lack of power was just too glaring, whether physical or special. At least special sets could potentially boost themselves further through Calm Mind, but it also had that fatal flaw of needing a lot of setup and it's still not being too strong. Plus, nobody was going to just freely give you the multiple Calm Minds you need to get anything going. The loss of hidden power was a major blow to Drifblim and its limited coverage. Thunderbolt was great, but not quite what it needed. But you could give it hidden power and it's unlikely anything would change. Forget early UU. Once again, Drifblim couldn't even hack it in PU. It completely fell off the map and was forgotten completely, once again dropping to untiered. People knew what its tricks were, but before, knowing the tricks wouldn't stop them from working. Now you could be completely unaware of what it might do and still be just fine because it come up so short from its lack of power, to say nothing of how easily you could take it out before it even got a chance to get going at all. While if Gen 8 was too much for Drifblim to handle, a generation without the generational gimmick or mechanic inflating the power level, mind you, the immensely power crept Gen 9, power crept before taking terrestrialization into account, didn't even acknowledge Drifblim. There was nothing Drifblim could offer any team in any tier with stats that looked ever more paltry. Forget buffs, it needed an evolution at this point. Terrestrialization wasn't really going to get it anywhere either. As cool as it might sound to have a classic sub-combine Drifblim that could terror Ghost and give it that much needed kick to its Shadow Balls, it was far too ineffective to leave any sort of impact in a generation where PU is populated by several far better ghosts like the Decidueye, Golurk, and Hoopa. So the untiered bin is where Drifblim landed once again. Drifblim has had a few scattered results over the past few years as people have tried to make it work on terrain teams. Its best result actually came just a few weeks ago, where Jack Clark placed 6th at the Dortmund Regionals using it on a team with Indeedee and a host of other lesser picks such as Hydreigon, Volcarona, Komodo, and Terra Normal Boomburst Toxtricity. Jack's team showcased some of the new tech Drifblim of recent years have come around to. First, Acrobatics as the attacking move of choice, which handles the ever-present Amoonguss. Second, Strength Sap, a move Drifblim only gained in Generation 8 and which you use because it is, to put it mildly, busted. While Jack gave Drifblim its best finish in years at Dortmund and might have the Mon in his Twitter profile banner, he can't claim the title of Drifblim's most dedicated devotee. That would go to Ian McLaughlin, who spent all of 2023 playing a Drifblim Indeedee team. While Ian never cracked the top 8, he placed day 2 at 5 different regionals using Drifblim. Ian came around to Drifblim because he wanted to run Indeedee Garchomp to punish the common meta cores of Arcanine Amoonguss and Iron Hands. Garchomp and Psychic Terrain, sound familiar? Ian mostly ran the same 4 moves on Drifblim throughout the season: Tailwind, Acrobatics, Hypnosis, and Haze. Hypnosis let him have consistent board presence, while Haze was essential for handling Dondozo, and in one of Ian's stream matches for the season was crucial to let him clutch up against that very metacore, piloted by former Drifblim enjoyer Ashton Cox, albeit with a bit of luck involved. Ian took all the way with him through the entire season, finding it useful even when Ruin Mons hit the field for its ability to run through frail, faster teams. While Ian didn't ever crack top 8, he came close with a 9th place in Milwaukee, and you have to admire the sheer dedication to one very silly balloon. And thank you so much to Ian McLaughlin, Jeremy Rodriguez, and Alberto Lara for the information. And that's it. So how good was Drifblim actually? Well, it actually started its competitive career off quite nicely with the late bloom of a debut generation, where it went from a sleeper pick to a top NU threat that wound up eclipsing the previous standard, Haunter. It became more specific in Gen 5's NU and Gen 6's PU, but it was still an effective Pokemon. It was for a long time the unburdened Pokemon. It was something of a signature ability for it, and it fueled its unique viability. It was very precise in the demands it made of its trainer, but the payoff was enormous in how it could no longer be outsped and thus clean house against weakened teams. Sadly, starting in Gen 7, its toolkit was no longer nearly as impressive or sufficient even in the lower tiers, and it found itself dreadfully outclassed, kicking off a hat trick of 3 consecutive untiered placements in a row, unable to compete with the superior ghosts that were tumbling down and joining it at the bottom of the tiering rung. Fortunately for it, Drifblim's VGC performance in Gen 7 was superb as soon as terrains became more prominent, thanks to the Psychic Seed and its Tailwind support. Drifblim's long overdue for a boost though. No, not a flare boost, but either some notable stat buffs or preferably an evolution. Whatever it is, we're hoping that Game Freak notices that it's paid its suffering dues and deigns to let it join the competitive spotlight once more. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos and for voting for this Pokemon for this month's patron pick. And thank you so much to our platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Dr. Mint, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Nurse Jake, Jack G, Lord of the Rabbit, Pretzel SP, Raven Daytona Ring, Ray Ray, Skylaria, Soares and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, and Quetzalcoatl Northropi for their major support of our videos. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Drifblim? How would you buff it? Do you think an evolution is appropriate? Whatever it is, let us know in the comments. Follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.